going to get started with our presentation today, and we're excited to have you joining us. Hope that you've had a wonderful summer thus far, and that we're hearing a lot about the heat waves and some extreme weather, and so we hope that you are comfortable wherever you are. We're going to go through our agenda. Jill, do you want to go to the next slide? And we're going to, as we get started, just a reminder, if you're just joining us, put your name and state, organization in the chat. We've got a full agenda today, and we've got a guest presenter today, so I'm looking forward to that. We'll give Jill some time for announcements, and then we'll get on with the rest of the agenda.
Hi, everybody. How are you all doing this afternoon? I hope it's a little cooler than it is here in DC for you, though I have a feeling it's just as hot everywhere around the country. I just very quickly wanted to go through some very important announcements in case you missed it in the emails that I sent to you. Just this week, we've been participating with NASHB, the National Academy for State Health Policy, and meeting with states that attended the Respite Summit that they hosted in February here in DC. And they're doing follow-up calls with the 16 states that were selected to participate in that event. And that event was really pivotal in allowing some of the lifespan respite grantees who were part of the teams that attended from their state to engage with their Medicaid, their state Medicaid agency. And it's really resulting in some incredible work and partnerships that are happening there. And as a follow-up to all of that, NASHB is going to be convening an ongoing family caregiver collaborative. It's going to be much broader than just respite, but it'll function very similarly to the way the Respite Summit functioned. States will apply to participate in the collaborative. 16 states, again, will be selected, and it will be state teams that participate. And I really urge all of you to consider applying for this because the TA from the National Academy for State Health Policy is really groundbreaking, and the connections that they can make for you to your Medicaid agency and other agencies in your state will be really wonderful. It's going to be a monthly Zoom meeting, but there will be one in-person meeting that they do in conjunction with the NASHB annual conference every year. The way to learn more about this is to sign up for their new family caregiving newsletter. And the link is on the slide, and I'll also put it in the chat. And then they're anticipating that around October, they will publish an announcement to apply for this opportunity. So I urge you to sign up for the newsletter, and I'll also let you know when the announcement comes out for NASHB to be able to participate in this. I'm sorry, more immediately, I just wanted to let you know about 2 upcoming webinars that are happening next week. One is on Tuesday. It's not an ARCH webinar, but it's very much focused on respite, and it's being hosted by the Kinship Care and, the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network that ARCH has been involved with since the beginning. And I will be presenting along with Rosalind Alber from Washington and Kim Vivaldi from the Lifespan program in Virginia, and then another respite program from Tampa, Florida. They're going to be talking about how they provide respite to kinship and grandparent families. So I think you might all enjoy that. You do have to register in advance, and the link to register is here. ARCH is also hosting a webinar next week. It's part of our volunteer and faith-based respite learning collaborative. We're going to be presenting a brand new program called Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network. And it's a parent-to-parent model of care. It's a little bit different than these types of models that have been tried in the past and not succeeded, because there's going to be a lot of support that's provided to these efforts through the Federation of Children with Special Needs in Massachusetts. And it's one of those innovative respite programs that was funded with $20 million that Massachusetts set aside from their American Rescue Plan Act funding. So It's one of many models I hope that we're going to be able to feature over the next year that are getting started with that funding, because there's a lot of innovation there and a lot we can learn from how they're starting up programs, which I think is sometimes really helpful to learn about the process and the tasks that had to be undertaken to get a program going. So again, you need to register in advance for that, and I'll put all these links in the chat. If anybody has any questions, you probably should just put those in the chat too, in the interest of time, and I will respond to them in the chat. So that's it for me, Cheryl.
Okay. All right. So we have prepared a short feedback survey on this learning collaborative to help us learn how well we've met your needs and interests on work you're conducting to implement the national strategy. And we've provided a link. Jill put it probably in the chat for your responses, and hope you will find a few minutes after this session maybe to complete and submit it. We will appreciate your feedback, anonymously given, so we can report to ACL on our activities. You may see other invitations from Arch besides this one to complete the survey as we reach out to all who have participated in the Learning Collaborative, but you only need to complete it once, and we just hope it won't be forgotten in your busy lives. All right, next slide. Okay. Today's topic, we are going to discuss negotiation. And when you hear negotiation, you probably tend to think the worst. It's a hostage negotiation or something equally heavy. But people negotiate with others every day. You might negotiate with friends about where to go on a vacation, or with a partner about what to cook for dinner. You might negotiate with vendors when buying a house, with a car salesperson to get a great deal. These everyday negotiations serve as a great practice for when something bigger comes up. Negotiation is more of a strategic discussion that involves reaching a mutually beneficial agreement with some give and take, as both parties usually need to make some concessions. The goal is to consider both sides and create a win-win scenario. Negotiation really is a critical skill for leaders, as it enables us to navigate complex situations, resolve conflicts, and reach those mutually beneficial agreements with others. The three basic conditions must be met first to just set the stage for the ability to have a negotiation. One of those conditions is that both parties must have an interest in negotiating with each other. If there's no interest, then getting both parties to the negotiating table will be nearly impossible. Sometimes the interest is obvious. It could be two colleagues working together to complete a project, and they need to divvy up resources to make it happen. Sometimes the interest isn't obvious for both parties. Maybe you need a colleague's assistance to complete a project, in which case you may have to create interest in it for your colleague to want to get involved. The second condition is that there must be something of value to trade. That can be time, priority, resources, information. So negotiating time spent finds a solution that meets the needs and interests of both parties, allowing them both to feel satisfied in the outcome. And the final condition is the authority to negotiate. If either side doesn't have the authority to negotiate, the resulting agreement will be flimsy, as it will require the support of the people who do. To avoid authority issues, it's always wise to understand the extent of the other side's ability to make decisions and how the decision-making approval process will work. Remember, just because somebody wants to negotiate doesn't mean you have to negotiate with them. Next slide, please. Okay. In negotiations, many people tend to assume they have a choice between two main strategies: to negotiate in a tough, demanding manner, or in a friendly, accommodating manner. Too soft and you'll avoid conflict, maybe get a quick solution to avoid a difficult situation, but you'll also make a lot of concessions and may end up feeling exploited and resentful. Too hard, and the battle of wills begins with extreme positions taken, an aggressive, even manipulative approach to a beat down agreement. You may get a victory, but you're not thinking of a long-term relationship. You're burning bridges that you may need later. The key to successful negotiation lies not in sticking really strictly to one style, but in adapting your approach in the context of each negotiation. This requires some good emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and the ability to read the situation and the other party style. As you get better at negotiation, you will use all of the styles we discussed, maybe even multiple ones in the course of one negotiation. In a minute, I'm going to ask you which style is yours. So listen to these different styles. A competitive negotiator may see negotiation as a contest they want to win. They aim for the best possible outcome for themselves, even if it comes at the other party's expense. This style can actually be very effective in time-sensitive situations when a quick decision is needed, but it can also damage relationships and lead to resentment. Collaborative negotiators seek win-win solutions and emphasizing mutual gains and the long-term relationship. They really invest time in understanding the other party's needs and finding creative solutions. This style is better suited for complex problems where innovative outside-the-box thinking may be required. But it is also time consuming and requires a high level of trust and openness from all parties that may not exist. Compromising negotiators aim for suitable but speedy solutions that partially satisfy both parties. They are willing to concede some points for the sake of reaching an agreement. This style can be helpful when time is limited or when a perfect solution is unrealistic, but it can also lead to poor outcomes as neither party is fully satisfied. Avoiding negotiators tend to sidestep negotiation and defer making decisions, often due to their discomfort with conflict and when they believe that the stakes are not worth the effort. This style can be appropriate when the issue at hand is trivial or when emotions are running a little too high, but avoiding important matters can lead to missed opportunities and unresolved problems. Accommodating negotiators prioritize the relationship over the outcome. They are willing to make concessions to keep the peace, maintain goodwill, but accommodators risk being taken advantage of and not having their own needs met. Each style that we've discussed brings valuable qualities to negotiation, but also potential drawbacks. So reflect on your tendencies. How do you approach a conflict or decision? Do you value harmony over your own needs? Do you like debating? Are you quick to propose a middle ground solution? Recognizing your natural tendencies is a first step to becoming a more versatile negotiator because they can also be your weaknesses. So we're going to have a quick polling question. Jill, do you want to bring that up? Okay. So what best describes your negotiating style? The style you tend to. Competitive? You want the best outcome for yourself? Accommodating? Want to preserve the relationship over all else? Collaborative? Like to take all the time necessary to come up with an innovative solution? Compromising? Willing to concede points to come up with a speedy solution? Avoiding confrontation? Tend to defer making decisions if emotions are running high? Let's see if you can describe your own tendencies. All right. Did we get very good? Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. So let's see, I've got okay. Jill, I don't know, can they see it? They can see the results. We've got a lot of collaborative spirits here. A few accommodating ones, and then other areas that are a little harder that we might need to build is more those competitive, compromising, and the avoiding confrontation style that sometimes is needed. So thank you. Okay. Did you share the results? I can't tell from my end. Did everyone see that? Okay,
Yes.
very good. Next slide, Jill. Okay, so let me explain this. Imagine that two siblings disagree about where to host their parents' anniversary party. They take positions. They say what they want. One wants to have it at a restaurant, while the other one wants to have it in their inner home. They can only make headway when they identify their deeper interests, why they want the position they've taken. One sibling doesn't have a lot of time to devote to preparation, while the other is concerned about the cost. Having discovered these touchier points and armed with this understanding of each other's interests, they do some research, make some concessions, and decide to host the party at a relatively inexpensive restaurant. This meets their mutual interests. They want to make this anniversary party special, and they both want to like each other when the party is done. This type of interest-based bargaining can enable solutions that meet each party's needs and with lots of possible options that could work, but one that they can settle on that is satisfactory to both. Remember that in most situations, you are negotiating a relationship, not a transaction. You're not just trying to get the best deal for yourself. You also want the best deal for the group, which will soon be your group. Whatever the agreement is, you are going to have to sleep in the bed you've made. Establish rapport with the other party early in negotiation by looking for areas on which you both agree. Bring up points on which you are fairly certain the other party can say yes. Agreement helps to establish a foundation of trust and respect that will be useful when you address more controversial topics. Although it's a good strategy to find areas to agree on first, avoid waiting too long to bring up points you know might be significant. When you know there are major obstacles, be tactful, but bring them up early rather than risk going through a laborious process and then having to put a Band-Aid fix on it at the end. Both sides tend to keep those touchy issues tucked away because they are painful or a bit hard, but you want to bring it up early. So next slide, please. Okay. Principled negotiation. Principled negotiation emphasizes interest with no posturing or tricks. It might sit hard on the merits of the situation, but it is soft on people. It is thinking long-term relationships, but also mutual gain. And here's some of the elements of principled negotiation. Try to separate the people from the problem. Strong emotions can become wrapped up with some issues in a negotiation and complicate it even further. Negotiators work to deal with emotions and personality issues separately from the issues at stake. There have been lots of times when I've entered a negotiation where I knew I'd be an emotional mess, but I just said, we're going to ignore my tears because I came to settle some issues. Strong emotion may mean I really care about the outcome. And never negotiate when you're angry. Be aware of your own hot buttons and do not raise to the bait if somebody pushes one of them. Help the other party stay cool too. When identifying potentially touchy points, refer to them objectively rather than assigning ownership to the problem. All right, focus on interests, not positions. Focusing on positions puts us against one another, which is not a good way to start any conversation. Negotiators often waste time arguing over who should get their way, or alternatively, trying to find a compromise point between those two firm positions they have staked. In principled negotiation, look beyond such hard and fast positions to try to identify underlying interests, their basic needs or wants or motivations. This encourages negotiators to explore those mutually beneficial solutions that satisfy the expectations of everyone involved. Invent options for mutual gain. Negotiators often settle for the first agreement they reach, relieved to have hit upon an outcome that both sides can live with. In principled negotiation, devote significant time to brainstorming a wide range of possible options before choosing the best one. Options refers to any available choices that parties might consider to satisfy their interests. And insist on using objective criteria. It is common in negotiation for parties to argue back and forth over about, whose facts are correct. A better way would be to rely on objective criteria, a fair, independent standard to settle the difference. Agree in advance on which objective criteria to use, and then agree to abide by that outcome, excuse me. But with objective criteria, that means different people measuring the criteria will reach the same results because they're clearly defined or quantifiable in nature. Remember, your goal isn't to reach an agreement. It is to reach an agreement that would make you better off than your fallback position, which is the best alternative to take if you don't reach a negotiated agreement. If a negotiation fails, good negotiators know what they'll do instead. For example, a house hunter might negotiate for 2 or more houses simultaneously while making a backup plan for living arrangements if those deals don't pan out. If you and your counterpart have thoroughly explored your interests and options, there's no shame in walking away from a deal that doesn't meet your interests as well as your fallback alternative does. In fact, it's the right thing to do. Next slide, please. Probing. To be a successful negotiator, you must develop a successful negotiation strategy. And to accomplish this, you must know the goals, needs, and motivations of the other party. The easiest, most expedient way to uncover this information is a thorough, skillful questioning. Probing is a type of questioning used in negotiations. Done correctly, it is far more powerful than like an offhand question and much more strategic. It expresses genuine interest in engaging in a sincere discussion of the issues and reaching a mutually beneficial outcome. But the way you ask questions can have a powerful bearing on the results of your negotiation. So, as they say, think before you speak. A cross-examination style of questioning or an interrogation designed to elicit an admission or a commitment, you are not probing. You probe precisely because you do not know the answer to your inquiry, or because you want to see if your counterpart knows the answer. Use phrases such as, tell me more about, or what's your biggest concern with, instead of questions that can be answered with a yes or no. Your goal in the early stages of a negotiation is to find out more about what the other party's real needs are. The more time they speak, the more information they disclose. Asking why can feel accusatory, even if sparked by curiosity. So ask why about the circumstances rather than what a person did or didn't do. Package the why in a softer language like, can you help me understand why? And let's see if you can hear the difference with this question. With virtual meeting software on everyone's devices, why are you insisting that we travel to conduct quarterly reviews? This question could be perceived as confrontational, puts the other side on the defense, and might elicit a knee-jerk response, and it does not advance exploration of any solution. So how about this subtle rephrase? With virtual meeting software on everyone's devices, help me understand why you want quarterly reviews to be in person. This way shows sincere interest in understanding the other side's needs, assumes the other side has good reasons and therefore consults them, calls for reflection by the other side so they can question their own interests and position, and is more likely to lead to a solution that addresses your counterpart's current reason for maintaining a certain process. You can use a nudging probe, such as, I see, or tell me more, or what happened after that? These exert subtle social pressure on people who resist being more thorough in their responses. You could use a silence probe rather than rushing to fill in the silence after your counterpart is spoken. You could put on the social pressure by simply waiting for her to say more, perhaps nodding your head in encouragement and keeping your pen posed to write down the valuable information you're expecting her to provide. An information probe is a follow-up question that asks for added or clarifying information. For instance, if you ask about deadlines and your counterpart responds and says his agency needs more time than is built into a schedule, you might say, when you say you need additional time, can you be more specific? A summary probe involves summarizing a counterpart's responses. So, for example, so it sounds like you would need 6 months to complete a project and that 3 full-time employees would be involved. Is that right? A clearinghouse probe seeks to gather any relevant, excuse me, I can't speak today, that the other party has not maybe yet explained about a given issue or issues. An example would be, are there any concerns you have about working with us that we haven't addressed yet? So seek to clarify an issue and evaluate the nature of any disagreement before exploring solutions to it. Discussing solutions before the problem is fully defined can lead to trouble later because there might have been a premature agreement on a problem that is not really fully understood by both parties. And here's a story to illustrate that. Once there was only one orange left in a kitchen, and 2 chefs were fighting over it. I need that orange. Yes, but I need that orange as well. Time was running out and they both needed an orange to finish their particular recipes for dinner. They decided on a compromise. They grabbed a big kitchen knife and split the orange in half, and each went to finish preparing his meal. One chef squeezed the juice from the orange and poured it into a special sauce he was making. It wasn't quite enough, but it would have to do. The other grated the peel and stirred the scrapings into a batter for his famous cake. He too didn't have as much as he would have liked, but given the situation, what else would he have done? Imagine how many probing questions would have been needed to come up with a solution that would have been so much more satisfactory to both of them. So next slide, please. Sorry, we're going through this really fast because I want to give plenty of time for our guests here today. So we're after all that probing, let's get to agreement. Anywhere along this line is a point of agreement. Every point can be a point of satisfaction. If you see the negotiation helps you move a step forward towards your goals. Below the red end is your fallback position. That's what you do if a negotiation fails and you walk away. The reservation point is the point where you have hit your minimum agreeable request. The anchor point is your starting point. The best deal, one you see is ideal, but not outrageous. The target is the point where you'd like to end up after negotiations. Anchoring is a negotiation tactic in which one party sets the initial terms or conditions of an offer. By establishing a strong anchor, leaders can shape the perception of value and potentially secure more favorable outcomes. For example, a leader might propose a higher initial budget, knowing that the other party is likely to negotiate down from that figure. By setting the anchor high, the final negotiated amount may still be within their desired range. According to the anchoring principle, the first offer made in a negotiation sets up a powerful, unconscious psychological anchor that acts like a gravitational force. There is a strong correlation between first offers and final outcomes. Now, when you do make a first offer, you need to keep these 3 points in mind. Hardly anyone accepts the first offer, so be sure you have room for maneuvering after you make it. Don't make an outrageous opening offer. An extreme offer usually backfires and can create a chilling effect, which occurs when the offer is so outrageous that the other party loses all motivation to continue negotiating. Ideally, your offer should be at or near what you think is the other party's reservation point, within the realm of what the other party might actually accept. Any point below your target is a concession or compromise point, but parties are still better off reaching agreement than not. Knowing what you were willing to do and not do in a negotiation is important. Know how much value you place on the issues you will be negotiating. and so that you can do as well as you can for yourself. Next slide, please. All right. Bias and assumptions. There are cultural biases that can trip you up in negotiations. In any cross-cultural setting, keep these kind of concepts in mind. Believe in a win-win mutual gain. Your counterpart may be unfamiliar with such a style, but may soon recognize it as a welcome change. When negotiating with those from cultures which are more relaxed about time, the value of patience cannot be overstated. Not only do these cultures have a different perspective on time, they may be also dealing with other constraints that you may be unaware of, such as consensus. In relationship-oriented cultures, a consensus-building process can be very time-consuming. Decisions are made slowly, and once made, difficult to change. There may be technology constraints. Perhaps they don't have access to email or have inconsistent power at certain points of the day. Perhaps copy machines and computers are less available. If you're from a faster paced culture, build in extra time from the outset and don't press your deadlines. If you're from a slower paced culture, be cognizant that your more urgent counterparts are under pressure from their own agencies. Obviously, prepare. If this is wise for negotiating in your own home culture, then it's 10 times wiser when negotiating outside your home culture. And start preparing from the first point of contact, if not before. Most relationship-oriented cultures often focus a great deal of their energy on pre-negotiation preparation and in-depth research, then work hard to come to a consensus about their official position. They do not expect to modify their position during the meeting. Changes will have to be negotiated among them in private. Consensus reached once again in another meeting scheduled. This is time consuming and tedious to more task-oriented cultures. But beware that there may be many people, maybe in front or behind the scenes, that may have to be taken into account who maybe don't appear to be key players. You may feel tempted to dismiss them mentally, just ignore them. But if that person happens to have a great deal of social prestige or holds a certain rank, regardless of his or her participation, it is important that they be shown as much respect as everyone else. Building real rapport is perhaps the most important part of doing business with relationship-oriented cultures. Task-oriented cultures tend to rely heavily on the logic and the inherent attractiveness of their proposals, and even strive to keep personal feelings out of the negotiating process. But in relationship-oriented cultures, one does not do business with strangers, no matter how attractive their offer or how airtight their logic. So never learn to never say no or yes, but say yes if. Direct, bald-faced no's can be offensive and embarrassing in cultures which have an indirect communication strategy where people tend to become vague and evasive rather than spelling out what they mean. On the other hand, some cultures with expressive styles, no might mean not yet to kind of provoke concessions. Using a negotiated yes helps you to be appropriately polite when working with indirect people and provide a more controlled response when working with those who are more verbally expressive. Assumptions can also trip you up. Let me share another story. Grandfather asks his grandson what he wants as a gift for his graduation. Grandson goes into raptures about a roadster he set on and details everything about it he wants. Color, leather, interior, tires, down to the fuzzy dice on the rear view mirror. When grandfather says, that's quite a tall order, grandson says he'll never ask him for another thing. Soon after, the roadster is delivered with a big red bow, and the grandson is ecstatic. He calls on Fred's to come over for a ride, only to then find that the beautiful car does not have an engine. When he calls grandfather to point out this error, grandfather reviews with him all he requested. He got everything he asked for, even the fuzzy dice. What we need to learn is to break the agreements to be negotiated into smaller parts. And if it's important, make sure each point is discussed and agreed upon. Next slide, please. Okay. You're going to be in negotiating situations throughout your life, and to learn from them, these are some questions you can ask yourself. What additional preparation would have helped me? How did I use probing to help in negotiations? What worked well and what didn't work well? What were the things that I or the other side did that helped to achieve an outcome? What have I learned about assumptions and biases and being careful about what I wish for? So we're going to break into group, and I want to hear about your negotiating successes and your lessons learned. Jill, can you get us? I am really pleased. We're very fortunate to hear from our presenter, Kathy Mayfield Smith, the Associate Director at the Institute of Families and Society at the University of South Carolina. He's going to be talking to us about the topic negotiation, finding acceptable solutions to shared challenges. Kathy is also a caregiver and the co-founder of the South Carolina Respite Coalition, has been involved in the lifespan respite movement for many years. And so I'm looking forward to hearing her share some insights and strategies for effective negotiation from her life of experiences, where she's negotiated in a variety of situations and with different partners and personalities. So we're going to turn the time over to her. Kathy?
Right. Thank you, Cheryl. Appreciate
sure
it.
Enough.
Okay, Jill, you can go to the next. So who is the negotiator? Next slide. As Cheryl said earlier, we are all negotiators, whether we realized it or not. We all negotiate in all aspects of our lives, whether it's with your parents, with your children, with your partners at work, with employees. And then I think as in our professional lives, as leaders of nonprofits or as a lifespan grantee, or even as somebody within a state agency, we find ourselves negotiating with all kinds of folks. Funding sources, providers, community partners, legislators, donors, and maybe even family caregivers. Next slide. So this is just a little background on me. I started at the University of South Carolina right out of graduate school, and I worked for a university center on excellence with developmental disabilities. So I was working in the field of disabilities, and I had various jobs at that organization, from clinical services, being an advocate as a school psychologist, being an advocate for parents and children with disabilities, and then but also working with academics and state policy makers. So it gave me a real a sense of different aspects of the work. It also gave me an opportunity to actually be housed and work inside of our South Carolina Medicaid agency, as well as the Bureau of Aging that was combined with the Medicaid agency at the time, and we were working on 2 federal grants. So it was great experiences for me. I was young. I wasn't very good at negotiating at the beginning, but over time I got better, and I got more confident. And then in the 90s, I became a parent. And that put me in the role of being a family caregiver. My middle daughter has a speech delay, auditory processing disorder, learning disability, and at the age of 24, we finally got the diagnosis that she was on the autism spectrum. So our journey through that whole process really, challenged us as a family, and created many opportunities for negotiating, whether it was in IEP meetings with teachers, when she actually was able to complete college, and working with the Disability Services Organization at the college level. So it gave me a good perspective on negotiating. It gave me a different perspective, because at that time when I was advocating for parents of children with special needs, I didn't feel the same vulnerability as I did when the first time I was in a position to be advocating for my daughter. I realized the power that the people we were negotiating with had in either providing the services or not providing the services. And so it was a real eye opener with regard to that power dynamic. Fortunately, I got over it because the reality is that there was nothing more important than being able to get the services that she needed to give her the best chance in life. So this is, I think that experience, and then in the late 90s, I co-founded the South Carolina Respite Coalition and have been their board president, as well as a lead grant writer. And so while I do not work for the organization, I'm heavily involved as I call it, my passion project. So in both this role and at the university, I've been fortunate enough to help the coalition develop, and also been fortunate to be involved in developing with the Office on Aging as well, our coordinated lifespan respite system since the beginning in 2009. The reason that I put this slide in here is because I think that it really helps to show the different seats at the table, and depending on what role you're in and what position you're in, that you in fact may view the negotiation in a different way. And I think that really shaped my understanding of how the role I was in on any given negotiation made a difference in the way that I would negotiate. So each of you have had multiple experiences and many times when you've had to negotiate. So I think my tip for you is to really recognize the fact that you are already a negotiator and really think about all the different experiences you have had that can shape how you negotiate. Next slide, Jill. The approaches that I like to take when negotiating is I really like to try to start from a position of strength. And so I really work to know the facts so that I can respond to questions that people ask. I like to be able to clearly articulate either what my strengths are or what the organization's strengths are, what they bring to the table, and how they can help move this issue forward, and also, help the other organization. One of the things that I also like to do is really assume that people are coming from a good position. The reality is, no matter what our frame of reference is, in the caregiver world, we are all really just trying to make things better for the caregivers in South Carolina or across the country. And so even when we run into, I have been in situations where a situation I thought I was really pretty comfortable in, and one new player was at the table, and they really threw a lot of wrenches in the situation. They had a lot of questions they didn't understand, but the reality is that they were coming from a good place. Even though that they pushed back, it was clear for this new person that we had to stop and kind of back up and provide a little bit more historical context, provide some education that really helped explain what was done, why the grant was where it was, what the decisions had been that had gotten us to that point. And it can even require multiple meetings so that you can get everybody up to the same position and the same level of understanding in order to be able to get the buy-in that you need. And so we were finally able to get to a place where everyone understood the value of the project, they understood the value of the partners, and more importantly, we all understood how it was going to help South Carolina family caregivers. This kind of goes along with what Cheryl said earlier. A negotiation is really not a battle to be won, but it's more of a conversation to be had to strategize and problem solve. I really, while I like to negotiate from a position of strength, it doesn't mean that I have to win and the other party has to lose. In fact, I think I really prefer, and I'm one of those people who picked collaborative in that collaborative approach in that poll because I really am more comfortable in that. I really feel that the relationships develop better, that the future of that partnership and any work together will be enhanced if we can come to a win-win solution. And even if it's not, even if we win better or they win better or they win more or we win more, whatever, the idea is that nobody really loses, that everybody comes away from the negotiation with at least part of what they wanted, or at least steps toward getting what they were really working toward. Okay, Jill, next slide. These are some of the strategies that have really worked for me and that I use. I think one of the things, and this is really this applies to everything, but certainly with the Respite Coalition, I think you need to understand what your vision is for the short term, for the long term. For us, our vision is that the Respite Coalition will be the hub for respite information and services to ensure regular and appropriate respite is available and accessible to all family caregivers in South Carolina. And that really guides all that we do. So in every negotiation, if we're working toward that, even if it's baby steps, that is really what we're trying to accomplish. So that's kind of, that light that keeps shining, that guides us in everything that we do. Educating myself, I think, going back to knowing the facts, but I think that historical context has actually served us well in a lot of places now. We were just talking about this earlier. A lot of new people are coming to the table. There are new families and new caregivers. There are new staff at the agencies, and so I think being able to go over that historical constant, that's not to say that you have to do everything the way it's always been done. As a matter of fact, you definitely don't, because you can, from that historical context, you can learn as much that didn't work as well as what did work. But I think understanding that historical context can really help put things in perspectives and sometimes really move things forward because people really understand what has been developed and the reasoning behind it. I think also, understanding everybody's role and their responsibilities. We were talking about this in our group, that people in state agencies often are guided by rules, whether they're federal rules, state rules. They have specific guidelines under laws in the way that they have to operate. There are limits on what they can do. And so I think understanding that and understanding the context within which they have to work, and really not pushing them to do things that they can't do, but trying to figure out how, what they can do. What are the limits? What are ways that we might be able to accomplish the same thing within those rules and those constructs? What are the political implications of anything? I can tell you right now, South Carolina is a very challenging state to work in right now. There are political forces that really aren't necessarily coming from the right place, while all of those people who have been working to really ensure that caregivers are getting the services that they need and getting connected to the programs that they need so that they can continue to support their loved ones in the home, are still really doing everything that they can in order to achieve those goals. But you can't ignore the political implications, especially if you're dealing with agencies that are either at the cabinet level, under the governor's office, or involved, you know, at that higher level, and are responsible to either the legislature or a higher power. So for me, understanding not only the facts and the history, but also understanding the agencies and what their roles are, and what their limitations are. Just as they need to understand our limitations and what we can do. As mentioned by Cheryl and several others, I think building relationships and building on relationships are some of the things that are most important, and will create the best outcomes in any negotiation. This is an area that I have always put a lot of effort into, and I think much of the success in South Carolina is based on those good relationships that have involved the trust and respect of others. You know, you have to know who you're talking to. If you don't know them, you know, and don't have a relationship with them, then that may be, you know, where you need to start. You don't know their strengths, they don't know your strengths. We don't know their challenges, they don't know our challenges, and just really kind of understanding the paradigm. If they're from a different agency, they may have operated under completely different rules and guidelines. And so understanding that and the perspective that they're coming from, I think offers those opportunities to build that relationship. And even if you can't get to a great relationship, you can at least get to a respectful one. As Cheryl said, you know, earlier, you're negotiating a relationship, not a transaction. So I think that is really one of the biggest things that one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing and has paid the greatest dividends in being able to move things forward. And again, to reiterate, prepare. There's no substitute for good preparation. Jill, the next slide, please. The table on this slide is a tool that I use to help me and our team prepare and be on the same page. It is actually a tool that I got out of a class here at USC that was part of a communications certificate program, but it was a class on negotiation. And I'm not going to go through everything on this for the sake of time. And when I use this tool, everything on the right side where it says notes is blank, because the idea is that you would fill it in given whatever your negotiation is going to be. But I did include some of the questions that you may want to consider as you're going through each of these things, and really trying to prepare yourself and make sure that you've examined all of these different things and have looked at not only what your goals are, but what things you're willing to give up, you know, what those alternatives are, as Cheryl mentioned earlier. Again, understanding the relationships, that power dynamic. And then also really kind of figuring out what solutions you might, or what alternative solutions you might have that would help you work toward a common agreement. All right, next. And then during the negotiation, I think it's really important, as I said before, understanding that power dynamic. Even if you're coming from the underdog, which I certainly felt like as a in those initial negotiations as a parent, I felt that way as a subcontractor, you know, with a grantee, and you know, in being sure that we are working toward the same thing, but also understanding, you know, the power that that the funding source had, that the grantee has in terms of that working relationship. And so it's important to understand that it shouldn't stop you, again, for asking for the things that you need, and for trying to negotiate and work out reasonable solutions. But it is something that you have to just be aware of. And if you are, then it helps with the negotiations and how you deal with different situations. I also think it's important to check, you know, I check my ego at the door. It's not always easy, but I think it's critical, so that you are all, again, working for the same thing. It doesn't matter who gets the credit. It doesn't matter who, who necessarily gets the most money, or or who is, higher on the ladder. The only thing that really matters is that you are all working toward that common end, and are able to reach agreements, that allow both sides to achieve the things that they are trying to achieve. Cheryl also mentioned emotions. I think keeping emotions under control, again, not something that is always easy, but it is something that is really critical. It doesn't mean that you can't be forceful, that you can't be, adamant about certain things, but it does. You don't want to be angry. You don't want to really get emotional, because that at that point it is very hard, to be clear in thoughts, to be clear in your communication with the other side, and sometimes it's difficult to be taken seriously because they see the emotions getting in the way. So that is just something that you really want to work, to be able to control, and sometimes you just kind of have to sit back, um, and compose yourself in order to continue with the negotiation. I think listening as much, if not more, than I talk, it is also something I try to do. We talked about probing, and in order to better understand someone's point of view, to be sure that you have actually understood what somebody said and what they meant, and what the implications of that would be. One thing that I like to do is ask questions. Sometimes generic questions, but other times very specific questions. And I may already know or think I know the answer to it, but I think it's important that we all kind of respond, and so that we know that the other person has the same understanding. This could be a definition. It could be a bias. It could be how something works or how it doesn't work, or what a rule is or what a rule isn't. And so I think it's important, to not be afraid to ask those questions, even if you think you know the answer, because you may get additional information that helps clarify, or in fact, it may add something critical, to what you need to know. All right, Jill. Next slide. Yep, patience. Patience is also critical in negotiation, and I think that varies from, when you go into something and you're not making the progress that you want, or as we talked about before, you have to bring everybody up to the same level of knowledge and understanding. In our work at the university, which is a different role that I play. In much of our work, with state agencies, oftentimes even the Medicaid agency, we will bring something up, and this includes having data to back it up, and kind of bring it up and point it out. And they just that just may not be in their priorities. It may be something they haven't thought about. So we will just kind of let it sit for a little while, and then at a later time, bring it back to their attention. It may be a new staff person, maybe a new deputy director. Sometimes it is bringing the information at the right time to the right person. But all of that takes patience, in order to really get, to where you want to go. Things just don't move that fast. And when I think back on our first grant in 2009 and where we are now, all these years later, and all the work that has gone into it, have we gotten everything we want? No, but we've made a lot of progress. I think flexibility is another key piece, just like patience. The other thing that for me, is be prepared to pivot. This is where that preparation on what are the alternatives, that you want, or that you wanted to gain, what are what are some things you may not have thought of? But if things are just simply shutting down, or you go into a meeting that you thought was about one thing, and all of a sudden priorities have changed because of something that happened at the legislature, or a new news report that came out, anything that could change that. And so you have to be able to pivot and begin to address those things. I've been in situations where, progress is very slow. There's a setback due to the changes in leadership, priorities, or staffing issues, whatever. And at that time, we just took a step back, clarified what the issues are, asked what can be done now, how can we help move this forward. And sometimes we just have to take our partner's lead, and just kind of go through that, and take our time. Many times, like I said, the reintroduction of ideas at a different time can make a big difference. And then this last piece is know and accept when you may not be the best person to do this particular negotiation at this time. I have found myself in a situation where, for whatever reason, in a particular meeting, there was a clash with somebody else in that meeting. In this particular instance, it was a new staff person, and who really had their own ideas about things. And so, it became very apparent that I was not going to be successful that day, and that I was not the person to carry the message. And so at that point, it was stepping back and then talking to other players who were a part of that group, and figuring out who was the best person to actually carry that message, who was the best person who might be able to get through and make headway, so that we could then get back to the work and move things forward. All right, Jill, last slide. So these are some specific examples. In South Carolina, the Department on Aging is our lifespan grantee, and they subcontract with the Respite Coalition. We have a very good relationship with them, but it's had its ups and downs over all of those years. Again, mostly due to staff changes, and not always the staff directly involved in the grant. But sometimes, other things in the agency, or changes, within the Respite Coalition. So building and nurturing those relationships has come with mutual respect for what each partner brings to the table, and a recognition that we are stronger together, whether or not we agree on everything, which we do not always do. I think the kinds of things that we've had to negotiate often repeatedly is, the grant applications. Sometimes it's whether we even are going to go after a grant or not. Is this the time to do it? Not always agreement on that, but we resolve those situations. When we do decide to go after a grant, what is it that we want to do with this grant? What is going to move things forward? What are the objectives of, the state agency? What are the objectives of the Respite Coalition? And how do we work together and work through the questions that we have? But we've always been able to come up with a better product through that negotiation process. Budgets are always something that have to be negotiated. But in South Carolina, because we have been able to develop a really coordinated system, especially with our voucher program, the kinds of things that we've had to negotiate, and once it's negotiated, doesn't mean we're not going to have to address it again, because most of these things we have had to address again. One thing is who serves what population. We have 3 voucher programs, and they go through actually 4 voucher programs when you count the lifespan program, and they all go through the Office on Aging. But to avoid duplication, the Department on Aging and the Family Caregiver Support Program provide vouchers for caregivers 55 and older, and caregivers of older adults and people who have Alzheimer's. The Respite Coalition's vouchers provides vouchers to parents of children with disabilities and caregivers of younger adults. So this is, while it works, and I think it's great in terms of the coordination of these programs, I also have a board who really wants us to be serving across the lifespan. And so we've been able to come up with alternate ways through our break rooms and through some other respite programs. The Respite Coalition has been involved in being able to serve caregivers in that older population. Caregiver assessments are really, I think, probably one of the most challenging things. And this is something that comes up repeatedly. Every time either the caregiver assessment changes or sometimes, staff change. So what we, with the older adults and the family caregiver support program, they have to do a more intensive caregiver assessment. They also have to do it over the phone so that it is more of an interview and an assessment process. And their needs are broader, and they provide a broader level of services. With the Respite Coalition, we're focused just on respite. So we really don't have to assess everything. For instance, all of the ADLs, the activities of daily living that are critical for older adults, aren't really relevant to children. And so we've been able to negotiate the things that we don't have to include in our assessment while still trying to achieve what that agency needs to achieve in their data collection efforts. And then also the method of doing it. They do it on the phone. That is not an efficient process for us, nor do we have the staff and the time to really do that. So we have a paper application that caregivers submit to us. It works better for them and it works better for us. However, we talk to every caregiver. And so that allows us to clarify everything, make sure they understand the program, make sure we understand what their needs are, and that we have gathered complete and accurate information. So that's been a good compromise. But it is one, again, that we will likely revisit again. I think we're in a good place now with the new data collection tools that the Office on Aging is doing. And I am going to stop there because I think we're kind of at the end of our time. So, and I'm at the end of the presentation. So
yeah, we won't have time for any questions today, but Kathy's information is there. We've got our next steps as a reminder to put on your calendar. Our next meeting will be on August 8th. We'll be discussing resilience and discipline and self-care. It's more difficult to contribute to the world in a positive and sustainable way without taking care of oneself first. And resilience is the ability to cope mentally and emotionally with a crisis. Self-discipline is the ability to resist impulses and maintain focus and see projects through to the end. So feel like this is important work for you and your team members as well. So we'll look forward to seeing you again in August. And then just the last slide here, if you have any questions about the topic or any of the Learning Collaborative sessions on the national strategy, please know that you can contact us and to discuss that. We want to help you to be successful in your efforts. And with that, we will thank you for your attention and your participation today. Thank you so much, Kathy. Really enjoyed your presentation and great ideas and information that will benefit us all. And have a wonderful day, everyone. And we'll let you get back to your lives. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
bye-bye.